Okay, I have good news and I have bad news. And since it's Friday, I'm going to start with the good news. Construction company insolvencies were down 8% on the previous year to the end of 2025. That, unfortunately, is where the good news ends. We held on to the title that nobody wants. Construction was still the industry with the highest number of company failures in the whole of the UK. And that should probably tell you something deep and troubling that is wrong with how our sector is structured. And if you think a reduction in insolvencies was perhaps a good sign, keep this in mind. The latest figures are just 8% down on a record high. And wait until you hear the reason behind many of them. Because in 2025, things got a whole lot nastier and more toxic. Company failures stopped being controlled and voluntary and started being forced. In 2024, a lot of companies simply closed their doors when things got too tough. Voluntary closures. In 2025, we saw a massive surge in compulsory liquidations. That's when a creditor, a bank, a big supplier, or often the taxman just gets sick of waiting, goes to court, and forces the company to shut down. That kind of forced failure went up sharply. In September 2025, compulsory liquidations were 17% higher than they were the year before. Creditors, it appears, have run out of patience. They've stopped being flexible and they've decided to enforce the debt aggressively. That signals that cash is desperately tight across the supply chain, and many people are just turning punitive. This means the crisis transformed from a high volume company led winding down into an aggressive environment ruled by creditor demands. It's not just happening here either. It looks like HMRC's strategy to recover debts that built up during the pandemic is a key reason behind the rising number of companies being shut down by the courts. Why did this financial stress get so severe? Mainly because companies were facing a triple squeeze, three huge financial pressures hitting them all at the same time. Firstly, money was expensive because of the high cost of borrowing. For construction firms, especially the smaller ones, you often need credit or an overdraft to bridge the gap between paying your lads and getting paid by the client. And when interest rates are high, that gap becomes a crippling cash flow crunch. Borrowing to keep the wheels turning transformed a temporary liquidity problem into a terminal insolvency event. Secondly, while the cost of materials and fuel eased a bit, the price of employing good people shot up in a wage war. We're seeing massive infrastructure projects needing bodies, and a lot of the experienced workforce is retiring. That shortage means competition for skilled labour is fierce, driving up wages. If a business was locked into a legacy long term fixed price contract, they couldn't pass those new higher labour costs onto the client, and that created an unsustainable squeeze on their cash flow. And the final blow was a collapse in demand. Late in 2025, the demand for new projects fell off a cliff. The UK Construction Purchasing Managers Index, or the PMI, plummeted to 39.4 in November 2025. That might not mean too much to you, but if the number is below 50, it means the sector is shrinking. And at 39.4, it represented the sharpest downturn since the original COVID-19 lockdown 5.5 years ago. Housing and civil engineering jobs were hit especially hard, and that meant firms that managed to survive the high costs of the previous years now face a terminal threat. They've got nothing left in the pipeline to bid on or to build. The crisis is disproportionately hitting the backbone of our industry, the subcontractors and the specialist trade base. Detailed analysis shows that over 97% of all corporate insolvencies nationally were companies with annual turnovers below £1 million. If you're a specialist trade firm, you're working on razor thin margins, and you're the ones who feel the pain first. The chronic problem of late payment remained acute. Subcontractors often fund several months of labour and materials before they get paid. In a high interest environment, having to wait 6 months for payment, then bridging that gap with expensive loans is what turns a thriving business into a failure. It wasn't just old debts and high costs killing business either. New regulations and legal fights also delivered swift and fatal blows. The Building Safety Act, introduced to fix historical fire safety and cladding issues, imposed massive new compliance costs. For big contractors, that meant Historical hidden defects suddenly became catastrophic, immediate financial liabilities. The collapse of Ardmore Construction in 2025 was explicitly linked to insurmountable cladding liabilities and regulatory changes. Perhaps the most aggressive failure mechanism, however, was litigation and adjudication. When cash is tight, subcontractors use legal tools to demand quick payment. Adjudication rulings are immediate and legally enforceable, meaning the judgment can instantly trigger the compulsory liquidation of the main contractor. This shows the chronic problem of late payment is now directly linked to rapid, legally enforced failure. The failures of contractors also cause problems for equipment suppliers because builders were short of cash and lacked confidence. They focused on renting equipment rather than buying it. For the industry as a whole, what's clear is that the fundamental problem of chronic late payment must be solved to stabilise the subcontractor base. The final lesson of 2025 was that resilience is no longer enough. Firms had to be aggressive about managing costs, chasing every single penny and knowing their legal exposure. The market is not waiting for anyone to catch up. If a firm slips on its finances, someone, likely the taxman, is just itching to pull the trigger on the business.